We lost 110,000 students just this last year. That's in addition to 161,000 we lost the year before. That's 250,000 kids, more than that have left the state of education here in California.
Lance Christensen is a California education policy specialist who's been focusing on California education for the last 20 years.
What I've noticed is that there's a severe lack on the fundamentals and a lack of attention on parents and families and the actual students themselves. We've seen the California Teachers Association basically take over education in the state, and of the 944 school boards, very few of them feel like they have any autonomy or control over the kinds of education they want to give their kids. Most parents feel really frustrated because they can't get in there. They can't speak out on issues like critical race theory or the math curriculum or maybe comprehensive sex ed issues.
Today, we'll sit down with Lance and get his perspective on education, all the ups and the downs. He'll also tell us about a direction moving forward and how we can fix some of the shortcomings we're seeing in today's world of education. But before we talk with Lance, we'll sit down with our panel of game changers and see their thoughts on education first. So let's dive right into today's American Game Changers. So I'm here with Michaela Riccaforte and again with John Fredericks. Both of you guys are journalists, and so I wanted to start this conversation off about education and the world of education. I feel like when I was growing up, I never heard about education. It was never in the news. You never heard about teachers making videos. You never saw parents going to city council or going to education board meetings. It just didn't seem like a big deal. But it's blown up so much and it's become such a hot topic in today's news cycle. So, Michaela, I would like to ask you, what's your thoughts on education and why has it become such a hot topic?
Well, since I've been covering education, last year and this year, I've been seeing a lot of reports, a lot of parents that are expressing concern about the content and the curriculum, and the books that are being placed in the schools. A lot of the books being placed in the schools have elements of critical race theory or gender ideology that are being taught to kids at a young age. I covered a story a few months ago about an LGBT organization that donated LGBT kids books to elementary schools in the LA Unified School District. And these books talk about everything from like gay penguin families to transgender 8-year-olds. A lot of people might think like, oh, like this is just like normalized now, this is okay. But I personally think that the fact that this is in the news means that it is being highly debated. And the fact that it's being debated means that there are many parents and people that are uncomfortable with having their kids learn this stuff, So that's something that I've seen in my reporting on education.
Well, I could definitely see why, those things definitely, anyone that's looking at it, objectively can be like, oh, that's pretty concerning. What is your thoughts, John? Why do you think it's become such a hot topic recently?
I think over the course of the pandemic, maybe it could be a number of things. I think on a more emotional standpoint, I think it could be parents think that they're losing control over their children's education. And I know vice versa, there's a lot riding on teachers right now. And I think teachers, a lot of people put the blame on the teacher. And I think teachers have their fair share of struggles as well. Education is so important. This is an opportunity to shape young minds and hearts and move them forward. And I think a lot of things are all over the place.
Yeah, no, I definitely. I think that with teachers in general, I do think that's someone, my mother is a teacher, and so I could see the pressures that are definitely getting put on some of these teachers. One thing about teaching, though, is, and if you talk to a lot of teachers, they always talk about how they don't get paid a lot, and that the funding is low. But, I look at California, and California in many states, but California in particular, they put a lot of money towards education. I think it was somewhere in the 80 billions. I could be off a little bit there, but there's a lot of money in regards put in, but you still see standards still slipping a little bit.
Well, to go off of what you guys were saying about teachers, in my reporting, right now, in the past few weeks, I've been covering a lot of stories about LA's teacher vacancy. There were about 400 vacant teaching positions earlier this month, positions that the new superintendent, Alberto Carvalho, wants to fill with staff from the district, like administrators, counselors, that sort of thing, who have prior teaching experience. But I've been talking to some teachers from the LAUSD and trying to figure out why there's such a big shortage of teachers. And you're right. What they're saying is that they don't get paid enough. They're feeling a lot of burnout due to stress, the stress of teaching kids in the pandemic, the stress of like all of the COVID-19 protocols, the weekly testing that they have to do. They're just all feeling the weight of it. And, many are retiring early. Many have been forced to either be fired due to the COVID-19 vaccine mandate for staff. And then I think 800 were fired. 600 more teachers were forced to move to online teaching, banned from campus. So, it's not only stress from the everyday, teaching kids and everything, but there's also, way more added burdens and stuff to the point where, like a lot of teachers who did it because they loved interacting with kids in the classroom, changing their lives and everything, no longer have that, can't do that kind of work from the screen. So, they're feeling burnt out. They're losing their love of teaching.
It's sad, and that shouldn't be the issue. It seems like we should be taking less things away. They shouldn't be having to worry about so many of those stuff. And they should be, in my brains, we should be paying teachers a little bit more. But it still comes to the question is, are we spending our money properly? I mean, there's a lot of money in it, but are we spending things properly? John, what do you think? Is this a money issue?
I think I'm sure, money always has something to do with every element of problems that we're facing in this day and age, as well as the next one. I think there's a lot riding on top of teachers' shoulders, and I think that will also include, I think teachers are almost expected to be the parent of students as well. They're expected to teach children not only the textbooks, but also other things in life. Maybe a parent should be teaching their kiddos. And you know what? Like that definitely adds to the pressure of their job. Their job is a public service job. It's hard. It's sacrificial. You got to put time into these kids. And I know with a lot of teachers I've interviewed and talked to, it's an uphill battle. Mm-hmm. And they continue to go to work each day, teach these kids. It's mostly from an emotional standpoint, I hear, as far as the challenges that they're facing. In regards to, the financial status of the problem, I'm sure there's always a little contribution to it because of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you guys so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. I hope to have you back on American Game Changers soon.
Awesome.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you. Awesome. So now I'm here with Lance Christensen. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Nick. I'm glad to be with you today.
Absolutely. So I want to jump right into it. You just listened to our panel discuss about education and their thoughts. I mentioned this to them, is that we spend a lot of money here in the state of California, and we spend a lot of money, and we're still ranked pretty basically at the bottom. What's going on? What's happening here in education in the state of California?
So, Nick, good to have you, to be with you. I have been watching California education for the last 20 years, both in the budget and the policy world. I've been an advocate for parents, and right now I work as the education policy vice president for the California Policy Center. And what I've noticed is that there's a severe lack on the fundamentals and a lack of attention on parents and families and the actual students themselves. We've seen the California Teachers Association basically take over education in the state. And of the 944 school boards, very few of them feel like they have any autonomy or control over the kinds of education they want to give their kids, or curriculum or different standards. They feel like it's a really heavy top-down approach. And when you go from probably the premier state in education back in the 70s and 80s to near the bottom of the barrel, that's a problem. And I think that a lot of people can feel the change and feel the frustration. Just one really quick statistic this last week, the count from October showed that we lost 110,000 students just this last year. And that's in addition to 161,000 we lost the year before. That's 250,000 kids, more than that have left the state of education here in California and public schools. It suggests that parents don't want anything to do with public schools or are very frustrated as well.
It's crazy. It's so interesting. I was telling you this before the show, is that I'm new to California. I'm a new Californian. I'm here for the long haul. But I grew up mostly in Texas. In Texas, there is no teachers unions that I know of. And if there is, maybe there is, they just didn't make such a big deal. One of the biggest things I've talked when I've been here and talked to Californians is that it seems like the teachers unions have a lot of power here. Can you explain that to me, to someone that doesn't really understand the teacher union and their sway and everything that they're doing here in California?
Yeah, so public school is really two kinds of schools, at least in California. One is the regular traditional school, the neighborhood, the district that you go to, is the school down the street or the one you're assigned to. The other part of that is the charter school system. There are actually public schools in the state of California, and they're funded by the taxpayer. The public schools get around $21,000 per kid per year. So if you're in a classroom of, say, 30, that's $600,000 plus that you're getting for that classroom. And where does the money go? That's usually a huge question for the district schools. They'll complain a lot of times it's not enough money and teachers have to pay out of their own pockets for things, but it really is unnecessary if you're very prudent with your money. Charter schools, on the other hand, most of them get 75, maybe 80% of what regular neighborhood district schools do, and yet they produce higher outcomes than everybody else, at least on average. If you were to take a charter school and a regular district school in a neighborhood, you could do the comparisons on test scores and money spent and all that kind of stuff. They do better. And a lot of people will say, well, hey, hold on, we got a problem here because these charter schools skim off the top. You've heard the argument, right? They take all the really good schools. It's actually not true. I was at a charter school yesterday down in Riverside County. And what I found there is a school of 1,300 kids that were led by really passionate teachers, really passionate administration that really cared for these kids. And you could see it exuded in everything they did. But if you were to go to some of these regular district schools in the neighborhood, a lot of the teachers there just don't feel that passion. They almost feel like they're stuck. It almost feels like prison in some places. And it's not like that everywhere. There are really good schools that are public schools, public district schools, and are really good charter schools. The difference between the two, though, is when a charter school fails or is not performing at the standard it should, you shut it down. There's accountability there. But if a district or a neighborhood public school is not doing well, we throw more money at it. And that's kind of what happens. So the teachers' unions have a lot of control over that situation, and it makes it very difficult.
So currently the teacher unions, they're not for charter schools, correct?
Largely. Now, some are in charter schools, rarely, but some are. But most of the time you have charter schools so that you can make sure that you've got some flexibility in the way you approach teaching. And so if you're in a regular neighborhood district school, you're going to have more control and say over the times that you get to come to school, how many classes you teach, what the hours of instruction are going to be, how much homework is given, extracurricular activities. The school or the teachers union have tons of sway in that area, and a lot of people just don't realize that.
Wow. What are some of the other arguments against charter schools? So you mentioned, skimming off the top, but what are some of the other things that people are proponents of school choice?
Well, a lot of people would argue that we should just send kids to the neighborhood school because that's where it is. And there are very articulate voices out there like Corey DeAngelis who've said, listen, we don't force people to go and shop at the grocery store that the government assigns to them. Even more so, we don't assign them to a government grocery store. Why would we do that with education? I really firmly believe that parents will know the best needs of their kids. I'm a father of 5 kids. I have an 18-year-old all the way down to a 6-year-old. She just turned 6, and she's in kindergarten. And my 8-year-old is different than my kindergartner, is different than my 3rd and 4th and 9th grader. And they go to 3 different schools, 2 different high schools and a different charter school. But the reason that they do that is because we know them. They're individualized and we know how to approach those issues. When you send them to a regular district school, like most kids, I went to a regular public neighborhood school. You're basically sending them to a complete stranger to spend 8 hours a day for 180 plus days a year. You hope you win the lottery, but that's why parents like the ability to make that choice. Is sometimes they want to have more control over that situation, and I don't begrudge them that feeling as a parent.
I try and do my best to talk to left, right, try to talk to everyone. And I do feel that it's beyond politics on the left or right. I think you're right that parents do want to have a little bit more say in their education. It's not about left or right. It's just about having a little bit more control in what's going on in the classroom. So I want to jump back a little bit. So we kind of went straight into the panel questions, but I want to ask you about a little bit about yourself. You mentioned that you've been in the education world for about 20 some odd years now. So what got you into it, and what all have you been working on while in the last 20 years?
So I graduated with a degree in English. My wife said, "What on earth are you going to do with a degree in English?" Right? And I kind of laughed and I said, "Well, I'll get a master's degree." And so I did. I got a master's in public policy from Pepperdine here in California, which brought us here. My wife's a 6th-generation Californian. We've been married for almost 22 years. So we moved, went to Pepperdine, and I was fascinated by the world of education policy. But before I had gone there, I'd actually taught 4th grade in Denver, Colorado, where I grew up. And I went back after my bachelor's degree, and I taught 4th grade for about, just over a semester. It wasn't a long time, but I got a chance to really learn the system. And I was fascinated by these kids. They're just so different in these classrooms. And so after that, I worked for Tom McClintock, who's now in Congress. When he was in the state Senate, we did a lot of education finance. I spent some time in think tank land. I worked for Reason Foundation, and then went and worked for John Warlock, the former state senator from Orange County. He was at the time the only CPA, certified public accountant, in the entire legislature. And so he was assigned to the budget committee on education. And so I got to see where every penny went as we spent in these kids. And it's fascinating to see a lot of the black holes that we send this money down in. And so I right now work at the California Policy Center, and I just believe that there should be accountability when we spend these dollars. We allow parents to make decisions about their kids when they send them to preschools or even college. Why would we not allow that same thing for K through 12 education?
Absolutely. It kind of leads me. So if, I know this is kind of, I'll give you a scenario here. I mean, someone you knew was given complete power to fix education. What can be done to fix this problem?
So I think first step back and look at the education code itself. It's thousands of pages long, and I doubt that anybody who's in education right now has read it all the way through. Mm-hmm. It's pretty jam-packed with stuff that's just unnecessary. Maybe it's old, it's not current. So I would go through and do a kids first audit of the education infrastructure in California. And I would focus everything on what is this doing to advance the needs of children and their education for the 21st century. We have a lot of kids. In California, 77% of the kids that go to community college have to take remediation classes for reading. That means that these kids are graduating without the basic ability to do high school level reading prepared for college. That's unfortunate. I would also go through and make sure that the budget is aligned with those values as well. And then go through and make sure that every school district understands you have control over the education of your children. You can no longer look to the state to be the ultimate arbiter about these kinds of things. School districts really have a lot of power. They're elected boards, they're trustees, they have constitutional authorities. They can do certain things that the state legislature and the governor can't change. And they need to understand and accept that authority and do something with it and be brave and courageous. So I'd make sure that the power is there, but I would engage parents more fully. Most parents feel really frustrated because they can't get in there. They can't speak out on issues like critical race theory or the math curriculum or maybe comprehensive sex ed issues. And they just want to be heard. It doesn't mean they want to come in and change everything or ban books or all these myths that we keep hearing about. It's just that they understand these kids only have so many years to get the basic education done before they leave home, you want to focus on the most important stuff.
Yeah. I saw something recently where it was like 100,000, I could be wrong on the number here, unaccounted for students from the school district. What is going on with that?
Yeah, so every year the state goes through and does what they call a census count once a year in October. And I don't understand why they just do it once a year. You literally could do this every single day. If you just load it into some sort of spreadsheet every day, when you take your attendance, okay, these are the kids that showed up, these aren't. And because that's how we pay for our education. We pay it based upon how many kids, are in their seats every day. But what happened is in October, when they counted, they found that there were over 100,000 less kids in the system than they thought there should be, than there were last year. And they don't know where these kids are going. They honestly have no idea. Some of these kids have dropped out of the system during the pandemic. We were seeing in Los Angeles Unified, like I talked about earlier, that many of these kids were probably in families that couldn't support their education at that point in time, or maybe they had to work, or maybe they lost their jobs. There was a lot of abuse that went on in these homes. Some of these kids literally could have died or gone other places, not in the hundreds of thousands, but there's very legitimately numbers of kids that were so chronically absent. In some school districts, upwards of 20% of the kids didn't show up again. You don't know where these kids go. And maybe they moved out of state, or maybe they did a private school, or their parents decided to homeschool them. There are 100 scenarios where that's a possibility. We should be doing everything we can to facilitate the education of these kids. But if you can't take care of even the basic logistics in your school district, how do you expect to find all the rest of these kids out there?
I completely agree. But I'll transition this a little bit. So this is be my final question. And it's a question I like to ask everyone that comes on the show. And that's a question of hope. We talked a little bit about the downside of education and kind of the struggles and stuff. But what are you hopeful for with education in the future?
So I have decided with my wife that we're going to stay in California and we're going to fight this out. I've had a lot of friends leave the state and have taken their kids to better places. But I tell everybody, what happens or what starts in California doesn't stay in California. It will eventually make its way to their respective city and state capital. And so I really believe that if parents rise up, they'll have a chance to take education back. And it doesn't mean that they have to, teach them weird stuff and homeschool them. I just believe that as parents have more responsibility in the day-to-day decisions of their education, of curriculum, making sure that it's appropriate and lines up with the values of common Californians and Americans, that we can do some really incredible things. This is California, and we're the most advanced place in the entire world. There really is no reason why our education can't, again, one day be number one in the world, but it won't be if we continue to push it from the top. And so I'm hopeful that parents will take the responsibility, that they'll take the opportunity and get out and really fight for their kids. I believe that they saw what can happen if you just let them alone for the last few years. And so I'm excited for 2022. I think this is the year of the parent, and it will be reflected in a lot of school board races and other races across the state.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm also with you because I'm here for the long haul. I'm going to be here in California, and you're right. Like the stuff that does happen here in California, it goes everywhere. We influence so much of this country, and we need to stay and fight. And you're right. Also, I think that this is going to be the time of the parents. So many people are asking so many questions in regards to education. And it's becoming such a big deal. So thank you so much, Lance, for coming by. I really appreciate it. I hope to have you back on a few times.
I would love to be back with you, Nick, and I appreciate your showing all you're doing.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much. Talk to you soon.
Okay, bye-bye.